Today's live IELTS class. My name is Adrian, and I'm streaming to you live from beautiful Victoria, the capital city of the province of British Columbia, here on West Coast, Canada. I hope everybody is having a great week so far. In this class, everyone, we are looking at IELTS, the reading section. Specifically, we're looking at the academic IELTS reading section. It's good to know that the reading section of the general IELTS section 3 is very similar to the academic reading section, so this will benefit all of you who are planning to sit your IELTS exam. And we're going to talk about how to get that high band 9 strategy, the perfect score. This is a members chat class. Of course, everybody is welcome to watch. I did see that we had a couple of new members joining us. Welcome Rashika, welcome Jaineel. It's good to see our members joining in. This class is brought to you by aehelp.com. For academic IELTS success, definitely visit us there. For the general IELTS, visit us at ieltshelp.com. That's generalieltshelp.com. On both of our websites, we have lots and lots of videos in HD. We have practice exams, and we have interactive courses to help you improve your communication, your English. This is a reading class, so make sure to read while I'm reading as well. So go with my flow. Welcome, Nico. Hi, Saga. All right. Saga woke up nice and early. You know what they say, Saga? The early bird catches the worm, so good on you for getting up at 6 a.m. to join the class. I'll quickly show you what our websites look like as we get into this lesson and wait for a few more of our members to join in. This is our academic IELTS website here with the blue background. You can click that big red button to join our premium package. It is a one-time payment for lifetime access. It's not a lot of money. Definitely worth the investment if you're planning to sit your IELTS test. And for the general IELTS, it's the green background. You can click that big red button to join us there. We are an IELTS registration center for the British Council for Saudi Arabia, and we are certified British Council agents, so make sure to ask us any question that you have. We have a lot of information, and we will gladly help you out. If you have questions, just send them to me by email. My email is Adrian, that's my name, at aehelp.com. You can also book practice speaking interviews with me. Alpha, nice to have you join back in. I believe you've been a member before, so it's good that you're joining us again. So right now, reading for members, and then roughly in 90 minutes, we will have another class that will be tasked to writing, where everybody will be able to join in on the chat. So make sure to stick around. And we'll have more classes tomorrow and the day after as well. So lots and lots of great information coming up. Subscribe to our channel to get all of our latest news and to get notifications of what we're doing. All right, everyone. So here is today's reading. This is our first reading passage from our first exam. I thought I'd start with this since I'm situated again back in Victoria. As many of you know, I just transitioned back from our European office in Budapest to our office in Victoria. And so we're starting with reading passage 1 from our test number 1. And this passage is titled Mountains of Ice. And sometimes, especially in the paper-based version of the test, you'll have a picture that will accompany the passage. All right. So Saga says, I remember this text, which is great. Saga, a really important tip, and this is for everyone. Don't always look at new IELTS materials. You should review materials that you've gone through once or twice before in the past. This is true for reading passages, for speaking questions, to see how you have improved, to see if you can comprehend, understand the passage better a second or third time that you read it. So repetition of IELTS practice materials is a really good practice strategy before your test. Too many students keep looking at new passages every day, all the time, without revisiting, checking their mistakes, and improving on past materials. So Saga, if you've seen this text before, that's a good thing. Okay. All right. So Mountains of Ice, here we go. We have our title, we have our picture. When you get to the reading section of your IELTS exam and you look at the title of the passage, what is the first step that you should take? So when you're in your paper-based or computer-based exam and you're in the reading section, can anybody tell me from our members, what is the very, very first step that you should take? Okay, let's see if anybody remembers this from some of the past videos or classes. Meanwhile, Alpha's saying, I got overall 7.5 and individual scores 7.5, 8.5, 7, and 7. That's fantastic. Alpha, really great score. Congratulations. I wish you the best in your next steps. So, Nico, Alpha, Saga, what should you do? So Saga says, read the title, ask questions, and ask what, why, and how. Yes, that is good to do. Saga, even before you do that, so I would say the second step is to read the title and ask questions, what, why, how. Before you do that, a really good step, and I did this when I did my official IELTS exam a couple weeks ago, is look at all of the passages. Okay, so I'm going to give you some tips on how to get a really high band score. And I know you only have 60 minutes for this, so I keep that in mind. Step number one is look at all of the titles of all reading passages and start with the one that is the most familiar for you, okay? So different people have different majors, different specialties. Some of you study biology, some of you study physics, mathematics, and there's a chance that reading passage 2 or 3 will have a topic that's more familiar for you. Usually passage 1 is the easiest, passage 2 gets more difficult, passage 3 is even more difficult, but that's not always true for every candidate. It also depends on your base knowledge. So let's say that you're majoring in mathematics and one of the reading passages, passage 3, is something about learning math, then you might want to start with that passage. It could be easier. Does everybody get that? So start with the topic that you feel is the closest to what you have been learning or experiencing in your life, because that will give you more confidence. It will give you more comprehension. Is that clear? Janelle says, yeah, thumbs up. That's good. All right, so it just takes a quick second, but always start with that. Now, of course, here we're doing this passage, Mountains of Ice, so we're only doing one passage, but in the actual test, start with the one that you feel is the most familiar, okay? And then step 2 is to read the title, look at the picture if there is one, and predict the information by asking what, why, how about the passage. So we'll do that right now, okay? And if you've done this before, great. It's going to be good practice right now. So let's say that you open up your reading section, you see this picture of this big piece of ice floating in the water, and then you read the title, Mountains of Ice. So the first question that you ask is, what is a mountain of ice in the water? And what would be your answer to that? So practice your critical thinking here. Practice your English. Hi, Natalie. Good to see you in the class. It's nice to see so many members joining in at this time. That's fantastic. So if you look at this and you go, okay, what is a mountain of ice? Alpha says it's an iceberg. And Alpha, what is that? So if you looked up, when you think about the what question, think about it like, if I looked this up in a dictionary, what would it tell me? Okay, so it is an iceberg. Okay, what is an iceberg? Okay. So it is an iceberg. And what's an iceberg? So how would you describe that? And keep yourself in English. This is really important. So don't start thinking in your own language, but stay in English throughout the whole test. Super important. Okay, Alpha says it's part of a broken glacier. Okay, it's let's phrase that a little bit clearer, Alpha. So it's a piece of ice that's broken off from a glacier, right? So a part of ice that's broken off from a glacier. Where? Okay, so give as complete of an answer as possible. Okay, so Saga says it's a piece of ice derived from a continent. Not quite, Saga, because in the North Pole, where we have a large piece of ice shield, if you will, or from Greenland, those aren't actually continents. Okay, and Natalie says in the ocean, right? So if we take Alpha's answer, we take Saga's answer, and we take Natalie's answer, and we put them all together, we start to get a good definition, right? So it is an iceberg. It is a large piece of ice which has broken off a glacier in the North or South Pole, usually, right? So in the North or South Poles of the planet, floating in the ocean. Okay, so in the IELTS, it's especially important to be as complete as possible with your answers, okay? Does everybody agree that this would be most likely the definition that we would read in the dictionary if we looked up what is an iceberg or what is a mountain of ice? It's a large piece of ice which has broken off a glacier in the North or South Pole floating in the ocean. Okay. Victor, thanks for coming on board. Thanks for the props. I appreciate that. Yeah, so there we go. That's what it is. Okay, so now you have clarity. Okay, so you've formed the idea of what you're reading about. What's the next question? So asking the right question is just as important. Actually, I would argue it's more important than giving the right answer. So what's the next question that I would ask about this topic? So now we know what a mountain of ice is. It's a glacier, or sorry, it's an iceberg. It's a large chunk of ice that's broken off from a glacier. What's the next question? What should I ask from myself? And this is happening very fast, okay? So here we're taking time to dissect, to express and explain this in detail. But in the official IELTS, this is happening in your brain very, very quickly. And I did the same steps when I did my IELTS a few weeks ago, and I got a band 9 in my reading. So Natalie says, why does it exist? Or Alpha is saying, why did it break off? Yeah, Saga is saying, why do icebergs emerge? So you're asking the right questions, okay? So, sure, why do icebergs come into existence? Okay, good question. Give me a nice full sentence answer for this one. Okay. So why does an iceberg come into existence? Why does this phenomenon happen? So why do we see icebergs floating in the ocean? And again, really focus on giving detailed answers. Taking time to do this and giving a good detailed answer will really help you to understand the passage and answer questions quickly and efficiently, getting high band scores, okay? Sometimes students think, oh, this is wasting so much time. I should just skim or scan for answers, but that's not effective. You have to have comprehension to get those high band scores, band 7 to 9, okay? It's not enough just to skim read or to just quickly go through the passage and the questions and try to match up information. It's not going to work, especially on the academic IELTS. It's not going to work, okay? General, maybe for some of the section 1 and 2 passages, but not for the academic or for section 3. Okay, so why do they exist? Why does an iceberg exist? Give me a nice detailed answer. It should be 1 or 2 sentences. Okay, so Saga says the density between water and ice has a difference. That's why this piece splits from the larger glacier. Okay, Saga, the first part is correct. So yes, there's a difference in density between ice and water, so frozen water and liquid water. But it's not why it splits. I don't think that's why glaciers break apart. It's more the reason of why they float, right? So the difference in density is the reason that ice floats in water. It doesn't just sink to the bottom of the ocean. Okay? Alpha says the most common reason icebergs exist is because of global warming. Global warming raises the temperature of the Earth in recent years, causing glaciers to melt and break apart. Okay, Alpha Force, I agree. So global warming is definitely a good reason. Maybe we don't go into that much detail and we just say warmer weather causes glaciers to break apart. Okay, I agree. And now we can add Saga's answer. So, and the difference in the density of ice and water allows the ice to float. Okay? So this is why they exist. Okay? So again, think about being specific with why and how. And this is where sometimes students say, oh, so IELTS isn't just testing my English, it's also testing my knowledge of science and other information. The answer to that question is yes. IELTS does test your school knowledge aside from simply your knowledge of English, especially the academic IELTS. That's why there's the academic IELTS and the general IELTS. Academic IELTS is testing not only your English, but it's testing your base knowledge and your communication. That's the reality. So it's a good idea to read up and make sure that you have a lot of this kind of base high school knowledge of science and facts. Okay. Sarab, good morning to you as well. Okay, all right. So the next question is what? What would you ask next? So we've asked the what are icebergs? We've asked the why do icebergs exist? And what would you ask next? So thinking about this topic, this passage, thinking about the author, the writer of this passage, what would be the most sensible how question here? What how question would mostly help you to understand the passage? So what's the how question here? What do you think? So again, what I said just a moment ago, often the question, asking the right question is more important than thinking about the right answer. And in this case, it's very, very true. So what would be the right how question here? So Saga says how they continue to exist. No, I don't think so, Saga. I think there's a better how question. Think about humans. Think about people. Humans are egocentric. We think about ourselves primarily. So what do you think would be the best how question? Yeah, very good, Janelle. So Janelle says, how do they affect human beings, other creatures? Okay. Natalie says the same, the effect of this phenomenon. So yeah, Natalie, the question is the how. Yeah, humans are egocentric, right? So how does this affect us? So how do icebergs affect people? We're very egocentric as humans. This is partly to our benefit. This is partly to our deficit, certainly, but we do view the world from our own eyes, from our own experience. So asking the how question, because this is the reason this author is giving you this information. So how do they affect us? So how do icebergs affect humans? It's a good question. What's the answer to that? So how do icebergs affect people? What would be a good answer to that? So how do icebergs, what are the main impacts that icebergs have on humanity? I mean, the planet doesn't really care. It's had warmer and colder periods through the millions of years. But we care as humans. So how does it affect us? What would be a good answer to that? Okay, so Alpha says it raises the sea level or the water level of the oceans, okay? Yeah, absolutely. And as we know, most of our major cities are situated near the ocean. Of course, we're highly dependent on water. Yeah, Alpha Force, good correction on the spelling. So oceans. So the water levels in the oceans increase. What else do they do? So how do icebergs affect people? Well, the melting of icebergs raise sea levels. And yeah, so Saga says icebergs float without orders or without restrictions. So people need to think about that because ships can be affected. They can sink ships, right? So, and they can be dangerous for ships, right? They can sink ships. Absolutely. Okay, good. So that's what you need to think about. All right, now, students, this information that we have so far, so we asked what are icebergs? Why do they exist? How does it affect people? And we came up with some answers. You have to train yourself for this kind of thinking when you read the title, and you have to think about this what, why, how in no more than 2 to 3 minutes. Okay? So you don't have a lot of time, and you need to be accurate, and you need to be detailed. Is that clear? So you have to think of good questions and answers after reading the title in 2 minutes. Okay, so you don't have as much time as what we just did, of course. You have to do this fast, and it takes training, so you have to practice this at home. Okay? All right. So now, yeah, and it has an impact on climate. Absolutely, Nico. It changes the actual temperature of the atmosphere as well. Good. Yeah. So transportation, danger for ships. Very good. Okay, next step, step 3, is you look at the questions. Okay? Now, we look at the questions, and the first set of questions that we have are yes, no, not given. This is kind of like a true, false, not given. This type of question you should not read before you read the passage because there is false and not given information that is confusing. So don't read this. If you're taking the computer-based exam, it's easy to ignore these types of questions because you have a drop-down menu. Okay, has anybody taken the computer-based exam from our members? With these true, false, or yes, no, not given, you actually have drop-down menus, so you have to click on them for the options to drop down. So it's really easy to ignore them because they're very, very short. So you just kind of go over them and don't pay attention. Okay, you realize, oh, it's yes, no, not given. No point in reading these. If you're doing the paper-based, you have to be a little bit more active in ignoring them because you do see the full questions and everything there. But if you're doing the computer-based, it's really easy to ignore them because they're drop-down menus, okay? All right. So then you go to the next one. And the next one says, complete the summary below. So this is a summary completion type question. Summary completion type questions, they're great to read because they're taken directly from the passage and they're usually paraphrased. So they use different words to describe the same information that's in the passage. So they're really good to read quickly, but just read them quickly. Don't read these questions slowly. And you don't have to try to understand these questions 100%. Just read them fast. Don't try to think about the answers. So here we go, everyone. Read this question with me. So let's do this from the top. The sinking of the Titanic. Okay, so some of you might realize, oh, that's a ship. And that's what I was thinking about with the how question. They're dangerous for ships. And one of the really famous examples of that is the Titanic. The Titanic sank after hitting an iceberg. So here we go. Read with me. This is about the speed that you need to read. Because there was no international group which monitored icebergs in 1912, it was the sole responsibility of the something to make sure there were no icebergs in the ship's path. The chief reason the iceberg wasn't detected was the something of the sea that night. Because of this, there were no waves crashing against the iceberg, making it difficult to spot. The captain swerved, but the iceberg scraped the side of the ship, ripping the something of the ship. Things should have been fine, nevertheless, but the watertight compartments were poorly designed, and once the water was in a few compartments, it was able to something into all the others. This was a major engineering defect that resulted in the eventual sinking. Okay, so when we're reading this, we're getting some ideas. We know there's going to be information about the sinking of the Titanic. While I'm reading this, I should be reminded of a key strategy to incorporate into my reading. Okay? Saga, take the paper-based exam if you're not comfortable touch typing. If you're comfortable touch typing, I recommend doing the computer-based exam. Okay, so while I'm reading this summary, what should that remind me of? There should be a strategy that should be like a red light in your head going, okay, I got to do this. I got to do this. So what should you do? What should you do? You're reading about the Titanic. You're reading this information about the Titanic hitting an iceberg and sinking. What should you be doing while you're reading this? There's a very important strategy, okay? So a key strategy that you should employ throughout the reading is what? What is it? And students that do this get higher band scores every time, guaranteed. Okay? And what is that strategy? Janiel says, reminding me that during the reading passage, I pay attention to understanding. Not necessarily. Okay. Saga says, read the passage first before answering. Yeah, you should read the passage. Skimming and scanning the passage only will not really help you to get high band scores, especially for people who have good English. Okay, it's not going to be effective. But there's something else that it should be reminding you to do. Alpha says, looking for paraphrasing. Rahul says, thinking of probable answers. Not really, Rahul. Thinking of probable answers can actually get you into trouble. They kind of think about that when they make the test, and they often will be the opposite of what you might think is the probable answer. So you got to be really careful with probable answers, Rahul. It's not bad to do that, but just be careful. Okay, Natalie says, see the main idea. Natalie, the word that I like the most in your response is see. Okay, so reading is visualize. Okay, so here you should have seen yourself as the captain of the Titanic, and you hit an iceberg. Okay, so that's what you should be reminded of, is that you need to visualize. You need to see what's going on, okay? And be active. So you're not just watching a TV while you read, but you're a part of that information. So you're a passenger on the Titanic. You're the captain of the Titanic. You see that iceberg. Oh, there it is. I have to do something. Oh no, I hit the iceberg. I'm sinking, okay? All right, so visualize the passage. Always visualize the passage. I know I say that every time, but it's so very important, okay? People forget to do that, all right? So visualize the passage, all right? And then here, for the last few questions, 10, 11, 12, 13, we have fill in the blanks, Okay, so complete the sentences. Choose no more than 2 words from the passage, so you're using words from the passage. And we read these because they're included in the passage. Okay, so here we go. Number 10, to avoid a Titanic-like disaster in the future, something formed the International Ice Patrol, IPP. The IPP's goal is to track the relevant data and something of the iceberg. The Canadian Space Agency bounces something off the water to measure iceberg movement. This data renders large-scale maritime disasters something. Okay. All right, good. So we read the questions that were valuable. We ignored the questions like true, false, not given, or multiple choice answers that are invaluable. And then we read the passage itself. All right. So when you master this, when you're practicing this at home and you use the correct strategy, you're going to have really nice flow during the reading section and you're going to get those high band scores. Okay. All right, so the next step is to actually read the passage and to visualize, especially when it's a very physical passage like an iceberg. So here we go, everyone. Let's read this together and visualize. Now, pay attention to picturing the information because I'm going to ask you what you see. Okay, so here we go. Mountains of ice. The word iceberg derives from the Dutch word Iceberg, meaning ice mountain. Icebergs are sections of glaciers that have broken off during the warmer summer months and float freely in open water. Icebergs are typically found in open water, predominantly around Greenland and Antarctica. The characteristics of icebergs, their historical impact, and the methods we employ today to monitor them are important topics. The reason icebergs exist is because of the difference between the density of ice and the density of salt water. The density of ice is approximately 920 kilograms per cubic meter, while the density of salt water is approximately 1,025 kilograms per cubic meter. Because ice is less dense than water, it floats. However, because the difference in densities is so small, only about 10% of the iceberg is visible above the ocean's surface. The rest of the iceberg hides below the water. This is the origin of the familiar expression tip of the iceberg, used to describe a situation where only part of the problem is noticeable. So when you read this paragraph describing why icebergs exist, what do you see? Okay, answer this question for me in 1 or 2 sentences. So what do you see while reading this information about the existence of icebergs? Now, for effective visualization, see the picture clearly, include yourself in the image, and make it interesting. That way your brain will catalog the information, it will keep the order of the information clear, and it will allow you to use the information effectively when you're answering questions. So what do you see when you read this kind of scientific information about why icebergs exist, why this phenomenon happens? What do you see? Okay, I have a couple of clear images. When you practice visual reading, you'll eventually become very visual. You'll really start enjoying reading as well. You'll become very visual when you read information. Okay, so Natalie says, I see the top of the iceberg and under the surface there's a huge part below. Yeah, and how do you include yourself, Natalie, into that image? So I agree with you. That's part of it. You see that there's a small part above and there's a big part below. Okay. Rashika says there's a small part of the iceberg floating in the ocean. Yeah. Okay, I'll tell you what I see. So when I'm seeing that, I also see that small part, and then I see this big, huge part below the water, and I see myself, okay, swimming under the ocean with some scuba gear, okay, There's some fishes around me, or fish, I should say. There's no such word as fishes. Of course, it's not countable. So fish. So there's some fish around me. I'm scuba diving, and I'm like, wow, that's a big chunk of ice under the ocean. There's probably a small piece that's above the ocean as well. Okay. Natalie says, I'm sitting on top of it, and I'm looking down. Good, Natalie. Yeah. So you want to be in there somewhere. Okay. I'm scuba diving, and I'm like, whoa, look at that huge piece of ice under the water. Okay. Absolutely. So see it. Be a part of it. Take part in the information that you read. It will be much easier. Okay. Janelle says, I'm a researcher. I'm in a ship, and I see 50 feet of iceberg above and 150 feet below. In fact, you would see 450 feet of ice below, Janelle, but it's a great start. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right, so that's what you want to do. You want to visualize. Let's keep going here. Icebergs range in height from 1 meter all the way up to over 75 meters above sea level. The height measures the visible portion of the iceberg. The tallest icebergs may have a total height of over 650 meters, including their underwater portion. The largest ever recorded was 168 meters above the water, meaning the entire height of this floater was likely greater than 1,500 meters. For reference, that is twice the height of most skyscrapers. Different sized icebergs have different name classifications. The smallest icebergs are called brash ice. The next category up in size is called growlers, and the ones after that are called bergy bits. For whatever reason, after those three classes, the people in charge of naming the icebergs got a little less creative. The next classes simply range from small to very large. Icebergs can be massive objects. Very large icebergs can weigh more than 200,000 tons. The largest iceberg ever recorded was over 30,000 square kilometers in area. Again, for reference, that is the approximate size of the country of Belgium. Okay, so we're reading, we're continuing to visualize. We see this big iceberg that's as big as a country. Now, my speed of reading, okay, when you're doing the reading section, don't rush, okay? Focus on comprehension. You have 20 minutes for each passage. It's enough time to read and answer accurately. So the speed that I'm reading is absolutely okay in the official IELTS to read at that speed. I am paying attention to one important detail while I'm reading. Did anybody catch what that is? So while I'm reading these paragraphs and these sentences, I'm not really reading super fast. So if I were reading super fast, I would be reading like different size iceberg have different name classifications. The smallest iceberg are called brash ice. The next category up in size is called growlers, and the ones after that are called icebergy bits. For whatever reason, after those three classes, the people in charge of naming the icebergs got a little less creative. The next class simply range from small to very large. Iceberg can be matched to large to very large. So I'd be reading like that, okay, if I were rushing. But I'm not doing that. I'm reading at a fairly comfortable pace. But I'm paying attention to one really important detail. What am I paying attention to? Did anybody catch that while you're following with me? And I hope that you're reading with me, everyone. What am I really paying attention to while reading? And it's very important to do this. Okay? Can anybody tell me what that is? So what detail or what element of my reading is there that has to be there, that I have to be really careful about? What is that? Rahul says names and numbers coming in the passage. Good try, Rahul. Not quite. Saga says comprehension. Absolutely, Saga, comprehension, but that's not what I'm thinking about. However, this is helping my comprehension a lot. Okay, so what is it? What's helping my comprehension? Okay, and a lot of students do not do this, and I think they definitely lose scores because of it. Okay, because it affects comprehension. So other than just the information, Victor says it's the visualization. I'm definitely visualizing, Victor. I mean, that's, yeah, we're talking about that. Certainly I'm doing that, but it's not just that I'm thinking about here. Okay, Saga says slow flow. Saga, you're on the right track because you can feel it, but you haven't put your thumb on it yet. Nico says to understand the passage, note important key information. Yes, but how am I doing that? Okay, it's a little bit of a tricky question. And it's one a lot of students don't pay attention to. Even native speakers, when they're doing exams, often will forget to do this, and it's not good, okay? So in order to increase your comprehension while reading, it is very important to observe and follow the rules of punctuation. Commas, semicolons, periods, and paragraph breaks. Okay? You have to be especially careful to do this when reading silently. Okay, so really pay attention to punctuation. What a lot of students do, and not only non-native English speakers, but also native English speakers tend to do this as well, is they carelessly ignore commas, periods, and they just read through them. It's like they're just kind of line reading the information. That's a really bad idea because it melts together. Okay, so Natalie says, I notice pauses. Yeah, okay, it's very important to do that. Okay, those pauses are a very important part of literature and they help your comprehension. So don't just skim through those pauses. That's really bad. Okay, definitely stop for commas, stop for periods, because they complete ideas. Okay, a comma says that an idea has completed, there's additional information. A period says that there's a complete idea, a new idea is coming. And a paragraph break says that you've completed an entire concept and we're moving on to another concept. Okay, so really important. Yeah, Victor says it's true, even in my mother tongue. Yeah, absolutely, Victor. So one sure way to lose marks is just to read mechanically through everything. So don't do that, okay? All right, so observe punctuation. Even if you read fast, stop for periods and commas and paragraph breaks, okay? All right, here we go. So let's continue. The most famous iceberg in history is undoubtedly the one which eventually sunk the English ship Titanic off the coast of Newfoundland in 1912. At that point in time, there was no central group which monitored iceberg activity. Ships relied on lookouts to spot the icebergs. For the Titanic, the unfortunate attitude was that any iceberg big enough to do damage to the ship would be seen in time. This attitude was, of course, catastrophically wrong. The main reason it failed was the remarkable calmness of the water that ill-fated night. The easiest way to spot an iceberg from afar is to see waves crashing up against it, but on the night the Titanic sank, there were no such helpful waves. For all intents and purposes, the iceberg was invisible until it was too late. The captain swerved at the last minute, but as the side of the ship scraped across the iceberg, the hull of the ocean liner tore open. Things still may have been fine had it not been for the poorly designed watertight compartments. It turns out that when too many compartments were affected, the water was simply able to spill over to all the other compartments. This was an engineering defect that contributed to the Titanic's sinking. Okay. Now, one way to practice your punctuation is, of course, to read out loud. So, okay. So I highly recommend doing that. I'm not sure how often you do that, but if somebody were to ask me, I would say that roughly 20 to 30% of your reading practice at home should be done aloud. How many of you are doing that, members? So how many of you are reading aloud 30% of the time that you're reading English text and you're practicing? And just be honest with yourselves. It's, I'm just curious also as a teacher how much students know about this and how much they do it. So how many of you, let's meet in the middle a quarter of the time. So if you read an hour, then you're reading 15 minutes aloud so that you can actually hear yourself and hear yourself pausing for all those commas and periods. So Janiel says me. Saga says I always read aloud at home. That's very good, Saga. Yeah, so more frequently reading aloud is better than less frequently. Absolutely. Okay. All right. Good. Great. So here we go. After the disaster of the Titanic, maritime authorities realized that a system needed to be put into place to monitor icebergs so that such a catastrophe would not be repeated. By 1914, the International Ice Patrol, IPP, was formed. Their purpose was to track all of the relevant meteorological and oceanographical data and to chart the movement of all major icebergs. Today, technology is used to track iceberg data. The Canadian Space Agency has multiple radar satellites which send microwaves off the ocean surface and record the reflection to track the movement of the icebergs. Maritime vessels have access to this information in real time, which allows them to know exactly where any local icebergs are at any moment, meaning that a repeat of the Titanic disaster is virtually impossible. Okay, good. All right, so that's the end of the passage. Now we're ready to answer some questions. Okay. Oh, one more quick tip. Notice that here we had a couple of words these are difficult to pronounce for anyone, native or non-native English speakers. Meteorological and oceanographical. When you're reading these silently or aloud, don't try to pronounce them too much, okay? Just read through them. So don't lose your comprehension because you get stuck on a word. That's a really bad idea, okay? So do not get stuck on difficult words. Just go through them, okay? Very important, all right? Okay, so now we get to yes, no, not given. Number one, icebergs are sections of glaciers that have broken off in the winter months. What do we need to figure out first when we see a true, false, not given or yes, no, not given? What do we need to think about or figure out first when we read one of these questions? Can anybody tell me? Okay, don't give me the answer yet, Saga, so hold your answer for a moment. So we don't want to be too quick with these, okay? With true, false, not given, we want to figure something out. So Janiel says we want to figure out if they're important or not. Why do we want to know that, Janiel? Yeah, so Rahul says we want to figure out whether the sentence is important for this passage or not. Why do we want to figure that out? So why do we want to figure out if it's important or not? What does that allow us to do? Okay, and I agree with you. So important or not? Sure. Because that allows us to figure out what? Yeah, Saga says it allows us to figure out if it's given or not given. Right, so it's kind of a two-step process. First, we want to figure out if it's given or if it's not given. So here, the question says, icebergs are sections of glaciers that have broken off in the winter months. So this is telling us what icebergs are. Clearly that is important for the passage. So that tells me that it's given. So now that I know that it's given, I can figure out if it's yes or no. So there's sections of glaciers that have broken off in the winter months. Yeah, exactly. So Janiel says no, it's not. Okay. Now, Saga, this is where you want to be really careful because you said false, but this is a yes, no, not given question, so you have to say no. Okay. In the computer-based exam, you cannot make a mistake because all you do is you choose no from the drop-down menu. But in the paper-based exam, sometimes students will write false instead of no, and they'll get that wrong. Okay, so make sure if you're doing the paper-based Saga, don't write false, but write no. Otherwise, you'll get it wrong. Okay, so that's a no. All right, number 2, icebergs exist because of the different densities of ice and salt water. Is it important to know for this passage why icebergs exist? Is that important? I think so, right? It answers the question of why do icebergs exist. We just read about that. So yes, so it's given. And so the answer here, do icebergs exist because there's a difference in densities? And the answer is yes. Otherwise, they would just sink to the bottom of the ocean and we wouldn't really think about them because they just would melt in the ocean, right? So we wouldn't see them. All right. Number 3, 90% of the iceberg is hidden below the water. Again, is it important to know how much of an iceberg we can see or not see? And now this is, of course, connected to the how is it important for humans, the danger to boats. So this is a yes as well. It's important. And is it true that 90% of the iceberg is hidden below the water? Yes, absolutely. Now here the passage is interesting because instead of saying this, the passage says 10% is visible above the water. So you have to use critical thinking. If 10% is visible above the water, that means 90% is hidden under the water. So clearly this is a yes. Okay, we're talking about 100% of the iceberg. If we can see 10% above the water, then 90% is hidden under the water, right? Okay, so careful. The IELTS exam is a thinking exam. It's not enough to just use English, but you have to think in English, okay? All right, the name classifications of icebergs derive from the Dutch language. Is it important to know what the name classifications of icebergs come from? Is this important to know? What's the answer to that? So getting a little bit trickier. You should know that these questions become more and more difficult as you move down. So I noticed that when I did my IELTS exam in February as well, is that definitely it's very true that 1 and 2 for true, false, not given, yes or not given, is kind of easier. But then for 4 and 5, I remember for the last couple of questions in my exam, I really had to think. I was like, oh, did the passage talk about that? Was it real or not? So they get quite tricky in the last couple. So you have to be careful. Is it important to know where the name classifications of icebergs come from? Janiel says not. Rashika says yes. This is a tricky one. The answer is no. It's not important. It's too much detail. So this is not given. The name iceberg comes from Dutch, Iceberg, but the name classification like bergiebits and so on, they don't. And if you remember the name, okay, so remember one of them was bergiebits? I can't remember how to spell it. That doesn't sound like a Dutch word at all anyway, right? So if you're really thinking about it critically, you realize that, it's too much detail. It's not important, okay? Some icebergs can be the size of a country. So size, important, yes. Can they be as big as a country? It said the country of Belgium. So definitely yes. If you were visualizing this, that was quite easy. Okay. So no, because winter months. Okay, no, yes, yes, not given, and yes. Those are the correct answers. All right. So again, for this type of question, figure out whether it's given first or not given, and then figure out whether it agrees or disagrees with the passage. Then you can get the right answers. And it's a sure way to get correct answers and be confident in your answers, okay? True, false, not given, yes or no, not given, they're not that bad as long as you practice this strategy. And you might have to look at the passage for one or two, but for yes, no, not given questions, you should be able to answer 3 or 4 of the questions without reading. Okay, so just from reading the passage once, without going back, I should say, without going back and reading again. All right. Okay. All right, members. So I'm going to go through this. We don't have a ton of time, so give me answers quickly here. The sinking of the Titanic. Because there was no international group which monitored icebergs in 1912, it was the sole responsibility of the something to make sure there were no icebergs in the ship's path. What's number 6? Anybody tell me? It's quite visual. Not the captain, Jaineel. Good try, though. It's not really the captain that's looking for icebergs. Okay, if you were visualizing this, you should have seen the boat. And at the top of the boat, there's a kind of a perch. It's called a crow's nest. And in that crow's nest, there's a person, probably not standing, that's looking. Okay. Good try with captain, but it's not quite the captain. The captain's somewhere here. Captain is steering the ship. Okay, so the captain's got the wheel. There's another person up there looking at what's in the water. Yeah, very good, Rishika. It's the lookout. Okay, look out, one word. It's the lookout. Okay, to make sure there were no icebergs in the ship's path. The chief reason the iceberg wasn't detected was the calmness of the sea that night. Okay, because of this, there were no waves crashing against the iceberg, making it difficult to spot. The captain swerved, but the iceberg scraped the side of the ship, ripping the hull of the ship. So think about hull. This is hull. This is the hull of the ship. So this part, the body of the boat, is called the hull of the ship. Okay. Things should have been fine nevertheless, but the watertight compartments were poorly designed, and once the water was in a few compartments, it was able to something into all the others. Now, number 9, I know that it's a verb, and if I know the English word, I can figure out that it's spill into the others. This was a major engineering defect which resulted in the eventual sinking. Okay. All right, students, unfortunately, I'm out of time. I spent a bit more time today talking about strategy like visualization, critical thinking, paying attention to punctuation, and reading aloud. So the last few questions, these ones, you'll have to do on your own. But if you send me the answers to this, I will send you back the answer key. I'll let you know whether you got them right or wrong. For all of our viewers, you can review the passage, try to answer these on your own, and then you can send me your answers to Adrian at aehelp.com, and I'll give you a special discount code for our premium package at aehelp.com and glshelp.com. That's where you can find all of our exams, videos, strategies, few dollars, one-time payment, lifetime access. Definitely worth to join. That's it for now, but I will be back in 30 minutes, and we're going to start a task 2 reading passage where everybody can join the chat. So definitely hang around. In half an hour, I will be back with task 2 writing, We're going to talk about planning strategy, the introduction. Natalie, you're very, very welcome. Thank you, everyone, for being here with me, and hopefully I will see you soon. I'm Adrian. I'm signing out for now, and I'll catch you shortly. Good to see you, Rashika, Saga. Bye for now.